What if Yoda defeated Palpatine in the Senate chambers? In the main timeline, the duel between the Masters of the Dark and Light sides of the Force results in a stalemate, and Yoda ends up going into hiding following his failure to end Sidious's oppression right there and right then. One of our viewers wondered, though, what if instead Yoda had succeeded in his original quest and defeated Palpatine? That's the story that we'll be exploring today. So strap yourselves in your starfighters, ready your astromechs, and let's dive right into this wild what-if journey across the galaxy. Our story begins in Palpatine's office on Coruscant. While Obi-Wan had gone to challenge Vader on Mustafar, Yoda stays to confront the man who he believes to be his equal in the Force, Darth Sidious, also known as Emperor Palpatine, the recently self-appointed ruler of the galaxy. The duel begins in much the same way as it does in the movies. The pair dance with their lightsabers, and Sidious laughs with his sadistic cackle. Each of them spin quickly as Palpatine's desk rises into the Senate chambers, and Yoda bounces around his opponent. Palpatine dodges and parries well, even managing to get a few attacks in on the green ketamine frog that Yoda had transformed into. However, things begin to change when the two masters start to display their full mastery of the Force. Yoda still deflects Palpatine's lightning, and he's still knocked off the podium to the ground. However, Yoda does not concede in this timeline like he did in Revenge of the Sith. Instead, he finds his lightsaber on the ground while Palpatine cackles, and his last semblance of will, he summons the power to use a lightsaber throw on the Sith Lord. Palpatine, who had become engrossed in his arrogance, much like when he didn't notice Vader's advances in Return of the Jedi, has no idea of his impending doom. He's so into drinking his rage and indulging in his self-glorification that he doesn't sense Yoda's saber coming towards him. At the last minute, he sees the small green blade coming in his direction, but there is absolutely nothing that he can do to stop it. Palpatine dies, shocked, as he's decapitated by Yoda's lightsaber. As Yoda's saber returns to his hand, and as Palpatine's body falls to the floor of the Senate chambers, Yoda flees to meet Bail Organa, just like in the movie. How does this impact the rest of our story? Let's keep going and find out. For the purposes of this story, I'm going to go with my personal headcanon for this, which is that Sidious sapped Padme's life force from her in order to get into Anakin's head, rather than her simply dying of sadness. In this situation, Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Bail are all present for the birth of Padme's children. However, because Sidious isn't influencing her life energy, she survives, more determined than ever, and she's ready to lead the galaxy into the next era. She's dedicated to raising her children, along with protecting the liberties of all galactic citizens in the Senate. With the death of the Emperor, Padme resolves to restore freedom to the Republic and not to allow it to devolve into totalitarianism. She also hopes that the man who had broken her heart, Anakin, is okay. Obi-Wan tells her of what had transpired on Mustafar, and she's devastated. However, she also knows that she must move forward, and that she must continue to do her duty to the people of her constituency. Upon the death of Palpatine, many things begin to unfold differently. Senator Organa, Mon Mothma, Padme, and Padme's delegation of 2,000, which can be seen being formed in the deleted scenes for Revenge of the Sith, end up gaining much more of a political foothold in the galaxy. Under the leadership of Senator Amidala, a call for action is made to the Senate to return to normality and to elect a new chancellor who would not fail to protect their civil liberties. Sadly, despite their message being popular with many galactic citizens, a lot of senators are swayed by Admiral Tarkin's commanding presence, who assures them that he will be a suitable successor to Palpatine and that he will restore order to the galaxy. Tarkin maintains Palpatine's narrative of a broken republic, and he swears that he will abdicate his power upon the establishment of a peaceful post-Clone Wars society. Mon cries in a fiery speech to her colleagues that they had heard that line before, and look where it had gotten them. Tarkin also uses Yoda's assassination of Palpatine as an act of treason, stating that the successor to Palpatine, who would try to hunt down the Jedi and get rid of their terrorist threats, this time for good, would be far better than whatever the delegation of 2,000 came up with. This rallying cry ends up uniting almost all of the senators who are on the fence, and Tarkin is voted to be the successor to Palpatine, and he proclaims himself the Emperor. One of the loose ends that isn't quite wrapped up for the Jedi is Vader. Obi-Wan leaves him on Mustafar, dying, crying out in rage. Palpatine doesn't come for Vader because, well, he's dead. However, another powerful Dark Force user senses Vader's distress. Following the siege of Mandalore, Maul is traveling the galaxy, and he can see the absolute distress of the powerful Sith, just as Sidious could in Revenge of the Sith. He understands that this is some type of message from the Force, and he guides his escaping ship towards Mustafar. When he finds Vader, he sees a part of himself in the young Sith. Sidious had twisted him, used him, and disposed of him, just as Maul had seen happen to himself many decades ago. He collects Vader, or rather, what remains of him, and he ends up taking him to what remained of the Night Sisters on Dathomir. He reads some old spells, and he ends up using the same magic that Talzin had used to heal him all of those years ago. Vader receives mechanical legs imbued with dark magic, and Maul uses sorcery to heal many of his burn wounds. He also gives Vader a mechanical arm, much like the legs, and he upgrades the hand which remained. Maul tells Vader that he's been building a force in the shadow for years, one that could challenge the likes of both the Republic and the Empire. Maul also informs Vader that his contacts in the criminal underworld have told him about the Emperor's death, along with Tarkin's ascension to power. Vader asks about Padme, and Maul tells him that she is still alive and well, fighting in the Senate against this new regime. This eases Vader's burden, and once again, he's committed to saving his wife. Maul again uses this to his advantage, telling Anakin that they would unlock some of those secrets that Palpatine had promised him together. Tensions continue to rise in the Senate. Padme's faction desperately opposes Tarkin's imperialists, and they try their best to ensure that he isn't allowed to exert his authority on the galaxy. However, it seems like the margin is just always met for him to receive emergency powers, and he's able to use this to his advantage. So, the crusade begins against the Jedi. Tarkin orders that the military continue to hunt them down, especially Yoda and Obi-Wan, who had killed two of the founding fathers of the new empire, at least to his knowledge. Tarkin also manages to continue to convince the Senate to move away from clone troopers, who he had always despised, and towards voluntary enlistment for willing citizens. While there are still some clones around, they're phased out and retired, much like what is seen in the Bad Batch. The public loses interest in the clones, and they are still treated as disposable by Tarkin's government. Soon, despite the commitment of Padme's faction to pacifism and peaceful opposition to Tarkin's rule in the Senate, more radical sects begin to emerge that are far more militant. People like Saw Gerrera start to cause trouble in systems transitioning to Tarkin's rule-by-fear political doctrine, and this only furthers Tarkin's influence over systems impacted by these radical rebels. It also results in certain systems battling against Imperial rule, and just like in the Clone Wars, a civil war starts to break out between systems united under the imperialist policies of the Empire and those who believe in the idealist ones of restoring the Republic. Even Padme and Mon Mothma, who are notorious for their peaceful attempts at reform, end up speaking in favor of creating a unified rebel movement that would be more effective in bringing back the Republic of old. Because of this opposition, each of these rebel sympathizers in the Imperial Senate are deemed as traitorous. They're forced to hide out on worlds, either openly or secretly, harboring disloyalty to the Empire, and they're often on the run. Their calls for building a more unified Republic restoration front are heeded, and on Yavin, Padme delivers a powerful speech which brings many of these cells behind her, along with her other senatorial colleagues. In this meeting, Padme is reunited with many of her old Jedi friends, who begin to come out of the woodworks in support of her vision. Yoda, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka are included in this number, and they are featured as prominent guests of honor for Padme's address. They're ready to finally fight back against the Imperial persecution that had plagued them for years, and they're revealing themselves to the galaxy as a symbol of hope for those who fear the Empire. Yoda and Obi-Wan are specifically mentioned by Padme due to their roles in the defeats of both Vader and Palpatine. In attendance for this meeting were two individuals who hid in the back of the room, each of whom were hooded and quiet, listening to the words of the esteemed senators. Both of them remained silent. However, upon the conclusion of the address, one of the figures comes forward, and he lets out a guttural yell. The room goes cold, and the military leadership of the Rebel Alliance trains their weapons on the intruder. The speaker then smiles under his hood, before stating that he means none of them any harm, and that he simply wanted to get the attention of all those present. In this moment, Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Ahsoka sense a dark presence of the Force, one that they hadn't felt in many years. The man who sought to address them was Maul. Maul, capitalizing on Padme's emotional speech, gives one of his own. He says that he's been building an empire of his own in the shadows for years, and that he believes he can help the Alliance. He's also fed up with the antics of the Empire, and he wants to unseat the tyrannical Tarkin government, especially since any friend of Palpatine was an enemy of his. He asked the rebellion if they would be willing to use his army, and he offers them graciously. He also tells the Alliance that his partner, the great Darth Vader, had risen from the ashes and wanted revenge on the Imperials. At this, Vader removes his hood, and he reveals to the people a reconstructed face thanks to the Night Sister magic. He has a slight green glow to him, and he has a different sensation in the Force than the last time Obi-Wan had seen him. However, the face is clearly that of Anakin Skywalker, just with more yellow eyes and a little bit more of a green tinge. Padme covers her mouth in shock, and Vader smiles at her, saying that it had been a long time since he had seen her. Obi-Wan looks at Maul dead in the eyes, telling him that there must have been a catch to this. Maul simply laughs, and he asks that when the New Republic gets back into power, he wanted a full pardon for his crimes, and that he wants to let them leave Dathomir alone for good. The rebels, being idealists, absolutely refuse. Maul scoffs at this, and he takes his apprentice away, chastising the rebellion for refusing his help. Anakin looks at Padme one more time, catching her eye, before leaving the room with his master. This causes a little bit of division within the rebel leadership ranks. People like Saw Gerrera are mad that the rebels hadn't taken the help of Maul and his criminal army. However, Padme, Mon Mothma, Bail, and many of the other rebel generals are content with this decision. They don't want to be associating with criminals, believing that it would make them just as bad as the empire they opposed. While Saw Gerrera doesn't necessarily agree with this, he does agree to go along and help the cause because he believes in the restoration of the Republic. After this meeting, the rebels decide that it's a full attack time on an Imperial facility, the Empire's major shipyard based on Corellia. After years of organizing, the rebel systems were finally ready to take on a huge objective. In this timeline, because more systems are dedicated to fighting Tarkin, and because of the inspiration that the Jedi provide, the rebellion is stronger than what we see in the original timeline. It is organized, has central leadership, and even has a small parliament of its own. Under the leadership of Padme, we see the rebels become more of what the Confederacy looked like during the Clone Wars, a legitimate governmental body with a strong military. While the Empire had known about the small cells, they had no idea that they were planning on unifying to create their own government. Tarkin, hearing about the rebel plans from Imperial intelligence that had been present on Yavin, decides to send an immediate message to these insurgents. His Senate, which is now composed entirely of politicians who support his agenda, is fully in favor of sending the Imperial fleet to Corellia to crush these rebels and restore peace to the galaxy. So, when Akbar, Riken, and Dodonna lead the attack on Corellia, they're met with quite a surprise. An Imperial fleet, led by Admiral Modi, sent to deal with the rebel threat, and when the rebels get to Corellia, they realize that they've lost the element of surprise. However, the Jedi believe that with a legitimate military and the Jedi's support, they can maintain the advantage that they had. This was a battle for the fate of the galaxy. Soon, it would be seen whether the Republic would return to what it once had been, or if the Empire would prevail. Modi's fleet encircles the shipyards of Corellia, creating a massive wall of Star Destroyers that the rebels must get through in order to make their way to their target. While some of the rebel leaders decide to use the Hammerhead corvettes to create holes in the wall, just like in Rogue One, there are far too many TIEs and Star Destroyers present in this situation that simply fill the holes. The Imperial Navy tries a strategy of numbers to overpower, along with displaying their full might to the rebels who dared challenge them now. Unfortunately, even though the rebels have Yoda, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka performing battle meditation, along with having a superior fleet to the one that they do in the original timeline, their power still falls short to that of the Imperial Armada. X-Wings are falling, Y-Wing bombers are crashing, and countless Mon Calamari command ships are being obliterated by mighty Star Destroyers. Admiral Modi looks from his Star Destroyer smugly, pleased with how the battle is going. Had the rebels been so foolish that they thought they could challenge the might of the Imperial machine? Even if they were well organized, Tarkin's hand could still wipe them out with one fell swoop. Also, attacking Corellia? How absurd! Modi notes to himself that the rebels were brave, and he would give them that. Bravery, though, didn't always lead to victory. However, in that instant, something unexpected occurs. One of the officers on the bridge of Modi's Star Destroyer indicates that a large group of ships had emerged from hyperspace, and that they all seemed to be from various species who had become synonymous with crime. Vailian ships representing the Black Sun were there, including one which Modi recognized as the personal vessel of Prince Zizor from briefings that he'd been present for in the past. Vessels indicating the presence of Pikes, the Hutt Council, and Crimson Dawn also appear. Another recognizable ship that Modi spots is the pleasure yacht of Dryden Voss, First Light. At first, Modi is under the impression that these criminals had come to help the Empire. After all, what benefit could they have possibly had from assisting the rebellion? However, soon he's proven otherwise. The criminal fleets begin firing upon Modi's, and the Imperials start to scramble. Chain of command breaks down, and despite Modi's best efforts to maintain order, because of this disruption, many of the less seasoned Imperial officers crack under pressure. The criminals and the rebels are once again able to gain a foothold, and their combined forces break through Modi's line of defense. When he realizes that he's beaten, the Admiral orders that his remaining fleet retreat, and he returns to Coruscant, ready to experience the consequences for his defeat. The rebels, with some help from the criminal fleet, end up taking Corellia back from the Empire, and they place their shipyards under control. Following this battle, the rebel leaders hail the criminals from Home 1. A familiar face picks up the call. It's Anakin. He no longer has his yellow Sith eyes, and a green glow that had been around him during the last meeting was gone. The rebels asked why he had come to help them, and where Maul was. Anakin smiles, and he shows them a short recording that had been taken of him dueling Maul, defeating him with his aggressive saber style and a barrage of force lightning, a skill which he had perfected due to the lack of impeding cybernetics that we see in the original trilogy. He says that the Shadow Collective is now under new management, and that he wanted to work with the rebellion to build a legitimate galactic government to take on the Imperials. He says that he's offered legitimate employment to many of the criminals within his ranks who had gotten in a bad spot and just gotten into crime because they thought they needed to. He also says that he's eliminated slavery and created a legitimate governmental system for all of these systems under the control of the Shadow Collective. Even the Hutts, who had been synonymous with crime for generations, believe Anakin's leadership to be effective. They also see opportunities for legitimate business and profit, so they follow him, knowing that this would make them more money and more legitimacy than they would have otherwise. You know, it's funny. A lot of these people look back to the days of the Trade Federation and the mega corporations which had ruled the galaxy during the Clone Wars, and they think that with Anakin's help and with Anakin's leadership, they could easily transition their people and their companies, their criminal enterprises, into legitimate businesses that would benefit the rest of the galaxy. Anakin also says that seeing his wife again had motivated him to take action, and that he no longer wanted to live as a slave to the dark side Force users that were only concerned with their own gain. Wary though he is, Akbar can see that something has changed about Anakin, and he tells him to return to the military with Yavin. So, the criminals go back to Yavin, and Anakin proposes to the political leadership of the Rebel Alliance that they merge forces. After a vigorous debate in their little parliament, the rebels agree, and the two parties become one. The Shadow Collective, now under Anakin's management, joins the rebellion. After this meeting, Anakin hugs his wife in private, and he pours out his soul to her. Anakin tells her that he had been corrupted by the dark side, along with the teachings of Sidious. Then, Maul had come and twisted him even further. However, seeing her there, alive, in the flesh, that had been enough for him to turn from his dark path of revenge. Anakin's children, who had been with Obi-Wan, run out to greet their mother, who they'd spotted, and she introduces Anakin to them. He places his hands on his mouth and nearly cries with joy. His children fill him with an immense feeling of love and affection, one that he hadn't experienced in many, many years. Obi-Wan also nods in approval from where he was before him, and Anakin comes over to him, saying that he's sorry for everything that he'd done. He had been a bad brother, and he hoped that together they could rebuild their relationship. Obi-Wan smiles and says that he can't wait for Anakin to join in the training of his children. When Anakin sees Ahsoka, he similarly apologizes to her, saying that in turning, he had failed her. She also tells Anakin that she's sorry for leaving him alone all those years ago, and that while she still maintains the rightful nature of her decision to lead, that she could have parted with him on better terms. Even Yoda gets in on the action. Anakin asks for his forgiveness after he had slaughtered so many younglings in the temple. Yoda says that his actions in the future would prove his character, and that they would have to rebuild the trust that they had once established. How do these events impact the finale to our story? Let's keep going to find out. In the end, Modi is punished by Tarkin. He's demoted from his prestigious rank, and Admiral Rampart is promoted to replace him. In this timeline, because Tarkin is in charge, Thrawn is often overlooked due to his extreme arrogance and anti-alien bias. However, Thrawn is still incredibly useful to the Empire. The TIE Defender program proves to be successful, but once again, Tarkin decides to use those funds to construct a Death Star. Because the Rebels have more might than in the original trilogy, and with the combined efforts of the Shadow Collective folk who had remained loyal to Anakin, they're still able to blow it up. In this timeline, though, Tarkin is not on board when it explodes, and he continues to rule from Coruscant. For his entire life, despite victory after victory by Padme's League, especially with Anakin back in the fold, he still continues to fight back until one day, after a decade of war, the growing Republic finally authorizes a covert strike on Tarkin by Special Forces. The Bad Batch, who had decided to defect from the Empire after Tarkin's government started to treat them poorly, and they ended up being the ones to poetically end his rule. In the middle of the night, they're able to infiltrate the Imperial Palace, and they take Tarkin hostage for the Republican rebels. Once he is off planet, Mon Mothma says that if the Empire recognizes their sovereignty without violence, they will return Tarkin to the Empire. Thrawn, who is still a highly recognized strategic mind, says that this would be the best alternative, and it would allow for the Empire to thrive for the systems which wanted to be a part of it. He says that the Republic would crumble itself, and that one day, they would be able to capitalize on that. For now, however, they needed patience. The Council of Moffs agrees, and Tarkin is returned to the Empire. Two distinct galactic governments emerge. The Republic, headed by the newly elected Chancellor Amidala, returns to the democratic principles of before. Naboo is made its capital, and the Parliament meets in a building that is being constructed near Theed. The Bad Batch, for their heroism, are granted medals upon the signing of the new treaty with the Empire. The Jedi, under the leadership of Anakin, Yoda, Obi-Wan, and the prodigal apprentice, Ahsoka, start to rebuild. Luke and Leia grow up to become fantastic Jedi, and many more Force-sensitive children are found and brought into the fold. Once again, the Jedi become symbols of peace, justice, and freedom. Anakin and Ahsoka bring some new perspectives to the revitalized order, and things start to change. On the other end of the galaxy, based on Coruscant, the Council of Moffs ratifies Thrawn as their new Emperor. Tarkin, who is now old, retires gracefully, passing away as a controversial figure in galactic politics. Thrawn, with help from his military, maintains regional stability and independence so long as those regions submit to his military and pay their taxes. Order is maintained, and a fragile balance is struck between these two powers. Finally, the galaxy has peace. How long it lasts, however, is something that nobody could predict. Good day, folks. I hope that you enjoyed this story. If you did, I'd recommend checking out this other video, What If Leia's Ship Escaped Darth Vader? If you have any other thoughts on her story, let us know in the comments. Would you like to see a part 2? If so, what do you think would go down? Have a bantha-tacular rest of your day, folks. And as always, I hope that you've had your daily delicious dose of Bantha Stew.